Definitely makes stuff like, I also thought I was really at first, and I Thank you.
It's okay, the important part.
Yeah,
Exactly. Okay, sweet. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for making the trek. It's a little easier because the weather is warmed up a lot. But yeah, we're going to be having Dr. Joyner speak to us today from the wilds, kind of about what her career path has looked like, what you can do in zoo medicine. She has a lot of years of really amazing experience, and she has a lot of wisdom to share. So yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to her.
Thank you. Guys, can everybody hear me okay? I feel like it's really hard to project in 3 directions. Good. Right, yeah, thank you for being here and for spending the evening with me. It sounds like I know everybody's really busy, and if you have exams coming up, even more so. So I do appreciate that. I'm gonna go ahead and open up my laptop here so I can read some notes. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So there's a million and one things that I could talk about, but we have very limited time. So what I really wanted to cover with you is talking about career pathways. And if you're here, then hopefully you're very interested in going on to being a veterinarian. And I definitely encourage everybody to follow their passion and their dreams. But a lot of people will change their mind at some point for a number of reasons. Maybe they decide that it's too much schooling, right? It's a lot of extra schooling, and I'll touch on that and in a bit. Or the cost. There's a huge debt to income ratio. I'll talk about that as well. And so these are all things that you really need to consider about. Certainly when I was going to vet school, I didn't care. I would have sold my soul, and I still feel that way. And if you feel that way, then that's it. That's good. But just make sure you're prepared for it, and just know what it means for you. I also want to then talk about, just very briefly, give some of my personal experiences that might apply to some of the things that I've talked about. And then I also want you to understand that if you don't go into veterinary medicine, that you can actually do a lot of the things that veterinarians do if you working with animals, but not as a veterinarian, and give you some examples of how that would work. Because not everybody goes to veterinary school to be clinical medicine. And so there are a lot of other things that you can do other than that. And then finally, I'm going to show you just a couple animal cases, because it's great talking about animals, and you can't talk about being a vet without talking about animals. So, all right. So choosing a pathway, and I'm going to talk about choosing a pathway. This could be domestic animals, or this could be non-domestic animals. You could apply this across the board. And there's several different pathways. I'm going to break it down into 3 main areas. One is going to be research, and one is clinical, which is like, what you would think of as a traditional veterinarian or zoo veterinarian. And then one is policy, which really isn't talked about very much, but is really, really important. So let's take a dive in and have a look at each one of these. So the first one is research that I want to cover, and this can be a really big part of what we do as a zoo and wildlife veterinarian. But it really kind of varies from job to job. Some zoo jobs or just small animal veterinary jobs have absolutely nothing to do with research. And so if that is not your if that's not your game, then that's okay. But if you're like, I really love research and I don't know which way to go, you can actually combine both of these really nicely. So research is sometimes done actually during your veterinary degree. So there are some veterinary degrees that will include a PhD with it. But if you end up going to a school that doesn't have that, that's okay. Don't worry. If you go on to do a veterinary residency, which you would do if you wanted to go into zoo medicine, you can combine that with some programs with a master's and or a PhD. And so if you didn't do that, but you're still into research, that's okay. You can still do a lot of research learning as a veterinary resident. So for example, you learn about project design, you learn about how to implement that research project, and then, how to write manuscripts for publication and things like that. That is actually all part of a residency. And so, there's really some overlap here, which I think is just important to know. But if you combine it with a PhD or a master's, you get a more robust research background. And a lot of the research that we do in veterinary medicine overlaps with research that a non-veterinarian can or would do. And so I want to give you some examples of those so that you understand what you can do in the profession and what you can do even outside. So the first one is epidemiology, and many of you probably know what that is, or maybe you take epidemiology courses where it's the study of disease, the study of incidence or frequency of disease, and basically just factors that impact that disease and disease transmission. And I want to talk about, an example of that is rabies. So rabies is a disease that many people all over the world know about, and it's a global disease. It kills 59,000 people around the world every year. And you don't think about it because we really don't have many cases in the US, but in other countries where the healthcare is different, then they have a lot more rabies cases. And interesting, this is a paper you see here. The title is Rabies Outbreak in African Wild Dogs in Botswana. And so rabies you've probably heard about in domestic pets, you've probably heard about in wild animals and in people. And so here's a really interesting disease that covers all of those in that sort of One Health concept. And this paper describes a rabies outbreak in African painted dogs or African wild dogs in a single pack. So it was a pack of about 35 dogs. 29 of them died or went missing from a rabies outbreak in that population. So that single isolated population was pretty much wiped out. And all of the genetics that goes along with it. And so obviously this is very concerning. They believe the rabies came from the domestic dogs in the local area, but they couldn't prove it. And they couldn't prove it because they didn't collect or they didn't submit testing for genetics. And so that brings me to a second field, conservation genetics. This is a really rapid growing field. And I would say more people in conservation genetics are not veterinarians, but if you're a veterinarian, you want to have that component, add that component to your background, you certainly can do. And I think this is one of the areas where you can actually make the biggest impact on wildlife populations. And this is a paper, it's titled Genetic Rescue Increases Fitness and Aids Rapid Recovery of an Endangered Marsupial Population. So what happened was there's this mountain pygmy possum, which you see up in the corner. There's cute little guy, and their population was down to about 1,800 in the entire world, and they're really only found in this one really unique place in Australia. It's not like they're even all over the country. It's one tiny little area. And what happened was the population started to decline, and at the same time, the genetic diversity started to drop as well. And so those two things together really brought them down to that low end of the population. So they tried to do, your typical mitigating factors. So they tried to remove any predators of these little guys. They tried to improve the environment in the area, and they saw no growth in this population of possum. So they started to do genetics, and what they found was there's a lot of these little pockets all over of these possums. And although there's very small numbers, the genetic diversity between these pockets of possum were quite diverse. So what they decided to do is they took just 6 lucky males, and they took them out of one population, or two different populations, and mixed them into a third population. And by just adding that genetic diversity, they saw a massive increase in the population of possums. And now they're at their highest level that they have been in decades. And so that's a really neat success story that solely relied on conservation genetics. And so really a neat aspect of research and veterinary medicine where you can really make a big impact. And so veterinarians can be epidemiologists, they can be conservation geneticists, but they don't have to be. And so it's a really interesting area if you decide not to go into veterinary medicine. But there are other subjects that, let's say you're particularly interested in reproduction or microbiology. Those are also areas that you can either combine with your veterinary training, or you can branch out and do those instead of veterinary training. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of research. Every job is going to have pros and cons. So the pros, I think, are research, design, and implementation. So again, this is also something you'll do in your residency, but not to the extent you would do in a master's or a PhD. And so that's really neat because you're really learning how to, if you have a problem, you're really learning how to develop ways to solve that. And then after your research project's done, you have to write about it. publish or perish, you've heard. So there's no point in, hogging that information. You have to share it with the community. And so you really need to write that information up and get it out there so people can read and learn from it. One of the things that's important about being a good researcher, I think, is having good critical thinking. And I think this is true for veterinary medicine as well. So if you really think that you're really good at analytics and stuff like that, problem solving, things like that, that's great, because research always has roadblocks. It never goes the way you think. Like, you think you've got all your ducks in a row and it's all set up, and then something terrible happens. Like our past resident, she had this great project with hellbenders, and she got little baby hellbenders and put them in these little tiny cages, and then didn't realize that they could all just break out of the cages. And so they were no longer individually housed, and it completely changed her research project. So you really do have to be a good critical thinker. And research is really important for working with wildlife. So if you're particularly interested in free-ranging wildlife, the veterinary profession now is really recommending that you do get a PhD, because there's a lot of people out there that are great clinicians, but to really understand how to implement and design research is important for working with free-ranging wildlife. So that's something to consider as well. So the cons of research, it's a really long-term commitment, right? So, you're talking about if you go to veterinary school and do a PhD, that's quite a lot of extra training. Even just a PhD alone, sometimes you hear these stories of people who have been doing it for 7 years, and I think, oh my gosh, it's time to go get a job. So it can be a long-term commitment. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And it can be very specialized sometimes. So if you're doing a research project on diseases of mussels, it's very, very specific. And it doesn't mean that you can't go off and work with other species, mammals, birds, whatever, because you've learned the background or the backbone of research, but it is very specific and specialized potentially. And some people spend their whole lives just focusing on one research project. So for example, CWD in white-tailed deer, we don't know everything there is to know about that. And so you could spend the next 30 years studying CWD and coming up with lots of great helpful information. But that can be a very specific focus. And then financially, there is a financial cost. Particularly if you're doing, veterinary medicine and a master's or a PhD. If you were just doing a master's or PhD, hopefully you would get either a scholarship or an assistantship or a teaching assistantship, and that would help pay for that. So there are ways to pay for it and be financially cognizant of that, but do understand that there is a financial cost that goes with it. Right, so we're moving on from research. We're going to have a look at veterinary medicine or clinical medicine, and taking this clinical approach to working with non-domestic species. So to become a clinical zoo veterinarian, you do need additional clinical training after veterinary school. It's not the only way to go, so I don't want to give that impression, but I don't want to get into the details of different routes of how to do it. I just want to give you a basic overview today. So let's cover some of that. So let's say you're in veterinary school, and you can actually start learning or working with zoo animals or exotic pets or wildlife during summer programs, whether in fact, even as a pre-vet, some of you might have a volunteer job where you're working with animals, or a paid job where you're working with animals. So that's one way to go. You can do clinical rotations. So in your 4th year, you guys probably know is a total clinical rotation year. And there are clinical rotations at a variety of zoos like Columbus Zoo and the Wilds that you can do, or San Diego Zoo, all sorts all over the country. And some of these are even international opportunities. And there's 2 websites that I recommend looking at. And that's the American Veterinary Medical Association and the American Association of Zoo Vets. They have great websites for finding those things. And then also your veterinary school will have a lot of those as well. And you'll be talking to maybe in your 2nd or 3rd year, you talk to the 4th years and you ask what they're doing, what they really like to do. So there are a lot of opportunities as students. Another opportunity you could do is go to conferences. This is a great way to meet and connect with veterinarians who are actually in the field and doing the work. And I know that it can be daunting to walk up to somebody and have a conversation when you don't know where, or who they are. And I still have some people that, in my profession were like, I kind of like to go talk to that person, but I feel a little awkward, I will say you will, if you're not good at networking, and trust me, it's not my thing. I don't really enjoy it, but it is important. You do really need to get out there and get your face seen and get to talk to people and let them know who you are and let them see what your interests are, and making that connection. And that's the best way to do that is going to be like at the Zoo Vet conference, or Exotics Con is a real big one that a lot of students go to, or Wildlife Disease Association. These are kind of three of the main ones that students tend to go to. It can be hard with your academic schedule. We totally get that, but maybe if you can get away for like 2 days or something like that, see if you can work it in. I don't know that they're going to continue virtual opportunities, so that may make it a little bit harder, but and then finally, there's these summer courses. They're, as far as I know, they're all for veterinary students at this point. I'll give a plug for Vet Ed at the Wild. So we started an online course. It came out of the COVID days when we're like, hey, we should put on this online course. And we're like, yeah, let's do it. And we'll get it up in a couple months. And it was like 12 months later, we're still trying to get this online course up and ready. But we've been doing it. We're going into our 3rd year now. This is a 3-day intensive online course where we talk about everything from rhino health to giraffe health to how to handle animals. We talk about the drugs that we use, all that kind of stuff. And then we actually live stream 3 procedures. So if we anesthetize a Przewalski's horse or a Persian onager or a Sichuan Takin or something like that, or we want to take x-rays of a rhino's foot or something like that, we'll live stream it so that the students can then ask questions in the moment. So that's an online course that we've done. UC Davis does a One Health course, which is a 1-month immersive course. It's a hands-on experiential program generally in the summer in Africa. So of course it wasn't going on for a few years, but most of these programs are getting up and running again. And then if you're into the weird and wonderful aquatics, there's AquaVet. There's 3 different courses. This is a summer program that is held by Cornell University. So there's some really interesting things that you can, get started right away as a student. After veterinary school, I do want to talk a little bit about what you would do if you wanted to go on and be a zoo veterinarian, or you might decide. I have actually had students come to me in their 4th year of veterinary school, and I say, what would you like to do? And they said, well, I'd like to do zoo medicine. And if you told me I could get a job, I'd do it, but it's really competitive. And so I'm just going to go into small animal medicine. Okay, that's fine. That's a choice to make. But if you're really gung ho and you want to go into zoo medicine, you have to understand that you're probably going to do a 1-year clinical training or internship, probably in small animal medicine, but you could also do it in surgery or large animal. But I would say 95% of the people do small animal medicine. And that's because before you learn to work on a Przewalski horse, you will work on a domestic horse. Before you learn to work on a cheetah, you will learn to work on a domestic cat. So there are some diseases that are very specific to animals in zoos, but we take a lot of our information from what we've learned in domestic animal medicine. And so the reason is no drug company is going to spend $1 million to learn if Serenia is really going to help stop cheetah from vomiting, and cheetah get gastritis generally from stress when they're in zoological situations sometimes. So we don't know if Serenia works in cheetah, but we presume it does because it works in domestic cats. And we don't know what the dose is, but we presume we know it's 1 to 2 mg per kg because that's what we give in domestic cats. So a lot of the information we take is from small animal medicine. So the first thing I tell all vet students is learn your domestic animals before you can learn your non-domestic or wild animals. Secondly, after that 1-year training course, you're probably going to do another internship in zoo or wildlife or exotic medicine or some combination of those 3. And that's what we call your specialty internship. So there's many small animal internships, many large animal and surgery internships. Zoo, wildlife, and exotic internships are much more limited in number. There is approximately 29 in the United States, in all of the US, and there's approximately 4 in Canada. And why I say approximately is because that changes from year to year. There might be a year where there, one place isn't offering that program. And then finally, where are these internships? Some of them are at universities, some of them are at zoos, some of them are in a wildlife center, and some of them are a combination. So some internships can be combined with a zoo and a university. We don't have that, for example, here in Columbus, but I think, I'm trying to think of one right now. It'll come to me, but there are a lot of internships that combine the two. After your 2 internships, you're then hopefully going to move on to a residency in zoo medicine. It might be a zoo, it might be zoo and wildlife, might be zoo and exotic pets, but some sort of, again, combination thereof. This is generally a 3-year training program, but it can be 4 years. There's a couple programs that are 4 years, and this may or may not include a master's. So the one that we have here at OSU is with OSU, Columbus Zoo, and the Wilds, and that's a 3-year program, and it includes a master's. So the first year is at OSU, and that's where you do your master's and your research and all of that. But you get to go to the zoo and you get to go to the Wilds. And then your second year is at Columbus Zoo, and then your third year is at the Wilds. So like I say, it could be combined university and or completely zoo. And there are around 22 programs in the United States. That's the numbers for 2021. And that says 22 ACZM. And what that means is that is the American College of Zoological Medicine. And I'll get onto that in a minute and explain that real quickly. There are other programs that you can do. So let's say, you don't get one of those 22-ish programs. You're like, but my second passion is pathology. You can go do a pathology residency at the National Zoo. They had pathology residents. Other institutions, here at Ohio State, the Columbus Zoo sends a lot of their necropsies to Ohio State. So if you're doing a pathology residency here, you will be seeing, some non-domestic animals. That's not going to be your main focus during a pathology residency, but you're going to get exposure to it. And if you then want to make yourself a specialist in that area, you can. So another one is preventive medicine is a common one too, where you could kind of cover more of like a One Health approach or epidemiology approach as well. So there are alternatives for sure. So I did briefly want to touch on what the American College of Zoological Medicine is. This is the college that it was established in 1983, and this is the college that sort of organizes or establishes residencies in the United States. They do not establish internships, just residencies. And so they set the training requirements for these residency programs so that there's some consistency across the different programs. They set the examination, so you can take an exam to become an ACZM diplomate, just like you can become board certified in cardiology, you can become board certified in ophthalmology, and you can become board certified in zoo medicine as well. And so they say what criteria you need in order to be eligible to take that exam, and then they host that exam every year and award the people who are successful. So what are the advantages of a clinical training program? So one of the things that's really nice is you get mentorship, and that's really important to a lot of people going into these programs now. It used to be that it was basically you were just another vet and you were working really hard and you didn't get a lot of mentorship or oversight, but we really do give a lot of that, not just on clinical skills, but also soft skills as well, so that you can be as successful as possible in the profession. You get a lot of hands-on clinical work with a variety of species. So it just depends on where you're working and what those species are. You're going to get general training in research or project design, like I mentioned, and you are expected to publish, because these ACZM training programs are hoping that you will then go on and take those board exams to become part of the college. And to do that, you are required to write 3 peer-reviewed publications, and you have to be first author, and one of those has to be original research. And so your residency is going to require you do research, and they're going to require that you write these papers. And then hopefully afterwards you will then sit the exam. And then finally, it'll give you opportunities to just sort of expand your CV and your experiences. So teach, maybe, you might want to go into academia in the future. So there's opportunities to teach vet students. There's, whether it's in clinics or whether it's, standing up and like doing something like this, go to conferences and present to your peers. If you've ever presented to 500 people, I can tell you it is nerve-wracking, and it's all the people who are older than you, and you're like, oh, these people all know so much more than me. Be very nerve-wracking, but it's a very good experience to get you out there and get your face and your name out there, and because you're going to want to get a job eventually, and then you want these people to see you and the work that you've done. So I'd say those are the advantages. And what are the disadvantages? Well, this is a very long-term commitment again. So you've already gone through undergrad, you've already gone through 4 years of vet school. And now you're going to have to go through 3 to 6 years of a clinical training program, or possibly longer. I know some people who have had to do 3 internships before they get the residency. So, it can be a long slog. They do often require frequent travel. Not all of them do, but as I mentioned, like the OSU residency that we have, you would be based in Columbus for 2 years, but then after a year, you'd have to move to the wilds, which is really in the middle of nowhere. And if you're into rural living, it's a great place to be. And if you're a city person, it's a little rough. There's not much around, although we're changing that. But these are also really rigorous and demanding programs. You already feel like you're putting all your energy into your classwork now. You get into vet school, it's going to be 4 more years of the same. And then now you're going to go to an internship and a residency, and you might be working 12 hours a day. So it can be very difficult. On average, people who do residencies, internships and residencies, have the highest debt to income ratio for veterinarians. They generally earn $30,000 to $50,000 a year less. So if you graduate from vet school and you go out and you get an emergency medicine job, you're gonna make good money. You're gonna be working some tough hours, so you're gonna make good money. If you go into an internship or residency, your salary drops dramatically. That's per year. Now, obviously, once you get out of those programs, you can then go out and make more money. But your starting salary as a veterinarian, coming out as a zoo veterinarian, is going to be less than your starting salary going into small animal medicine. It's really more on par with large animal medicine. You make less money. And that's because you don't have your clients paying the bills. You have other ways that the institution needs to make your money. So that was based on a 2018 AVMA report. It's improving. It's definitely improving. OSU just increased the salary. I would say they increased it by about 60%, like significantly, of their residents across the board. And so those residents are now actually making a reasonable wage, still far less than what they would be making, but they're no longer making $33,000 a year. So, finding a program that matches you. So just very quickly, what I'm going to say is, if you wanted to go into a clinical internship or residency, you do this through what's called a match program. You apply to the program, you pick the programs you want to, and then they pick you, and then they do some really weird algorithm, and somehow you all match up, hopefully. And it's a complicated process, so I don't want to go into it. We're gonna move on. So choosing another path, we're gonna move on to policy. And this is, I'll just touch on this briefly. It's the least common pathway that people go into. It potentially has the greatest impact for animals, domestic and wild, because policy is where, we are deciding how these animals are managed. So it's really, really important. And that's why I really wanted to just cover it briefly. As a veterinary student, you could start your learning more about policy, and even if you're like, oh, I hate policy, but maybe you just want to learn a little bit about it. You could do an AVMA government externship. This is a 4-week program. It introduces externs to policy issues that are facing our profession. There's hands-on lobbying experience and on Capitol Hill. And the very best part about this is it has a stipend. Most externships don't pay you anything and you have to pay for housing, but this one actually has a stipend, which is great. There's the AVMA legislative fly-in. This is a 2-day workshop that brings veterinarians and veterinary students together in Washington, D.C. for hands-on advocacy experience with the goal of learning how policy shapes, how we shape public policy and what we do. And then there is the AVMA fellowship program. This is a 1-year program, again in DC on Capitol Hill, where the veterinarians, this is what you would do. Sorry, I should say this is what you would do after veterinary school. You do a 1-year program and you have the opportunity to meet with politicians and to help shape public policy while you're enhancing your knowledge of the whole policy process. Again, this one has a stipend. It actually pays you, which is pretty amazing. And everybody I've spoken to has done this. They don't have many of them, but everybody who I've spoken to says it's the most amazing experience of their life. So those are the 3 areas that we covered: research, policy, and clinical medicine. And I just want to cover something about marketing yourself or making yourself marketable, and just kind of deviate from that whole veterinary perspective for a moment. This will apply no matter what you do in life. So whether you go into veterinary medicine or whether you go into something completely different, what I recommend is knowing what you want or knowing what you like. A lot of us like so many different things that we really find it hard to choose from just one. But I would say try everything, investigate everything. You might find there's things that you like that you had no idea about. I don't know, a lot of you may even not have known you wanted to do veterinary medicine. There's going to be people in this room who wanted to do it since they were 6 years old. There's going to be people who decided to do it in high school. And then there's going to be some people that came to university and found out there was this pre-vet club and got, mixed into it and was like, this is what I want to do. I really love this. And so that's why you really need to try everything. Don't think, oh, I'm going to hate that. Just give it a try. If you don't like it, put it behind you. Show an interest. So I would say, if I understand that university is really expensive, and you probably, a lot of students don't have time to work and don't have extra funds, but if it's possible, try to join some of these organizations. They have student rates which are discounted, and so it's going to be much more affordable, even though it may seem expensive. Pick 1, pick 2, whatever you can. If you can join them all, go ahead. But I put up the acronyms: American Association of Zoo Vets up there, Wildlife Disease Association, American Association of Wildlife Veterinarians, Association of Avian Veterinarians, Association of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians, Society for Conservation Biology. These are the main ones that zoo vets or people interested in zoo medicine tend to join. If you're like, I just love birds, then just join the bird one. If you're like, reptiles are the coolest thing, then join ARAV. AAZV is the biggest one. That's the one, general zoo medicine, that everybody tends to join. But what you're going to get out of that, if you're going to get on the listserv and you're going to get on the website and you're going to get their journals. And you probably have a ton of stuff to read already, but every once in a while, you might just pick up an article and read through it, and you'll just hear some of the coolest stuff. You're like, wow, they did that with rhinos. That's super cool. And I think it just helps keep you engaged and excited and interested as you're going through this, because right now you're probably getting thrown a lot of crap that you're like, I really don't want to know this. I just want to get over with. You got to look at things that are also going to keep you engaged too. And then, as I said, go to conferences whenever possible. I realize this is daunting, but we were all students at once. Just remember that the person you're talking to was a student one time and was somebody who wanted to go to vet school and didn't know how it was going to go. So we've all been in the same boat. And then finally, just be professional. That doesn't mean you can't let loose and have a good time. And you may see some of your friends doing some things that are crazy. Let them do what they want to do. That's their choice. But just try to always, be professional. Other things you might want to consider: making yourself marketable, particularly for wildlife medicine. If you are multilingual, then I very much envy you. There are 29 countries around the world that speak French. There are 20 countries that speak Spanish. And so in total, what is that? That's if you include the 67 countries that speak English, that is 60% of the world that you could potentially work in just by knowing those 3 languages. Whereas if you just knew English, you could only work in the English countries. And so Africa, some of them are French speaking, all across South America. You know, this is a great asset to have if you can speak 2 languages. If you speak a different language other than these 2, that's fantastic. You know, all the places, all the countries have wildlife. There isn't any reason why you can't use that to your advantage. And so, you know, if you can learn a little bit about that, that'd be great. And then be open to travel. If you're interested in wildlife, you're more than likely going to have to travel. We have some great wildlife in the United States and in North America. But generally, if people are doing field work, they're going to travel. And then finally, being in the right place at the right time, knowing when to, you know, knowing when to join in. And if you see an opportunity, do the best that you can to take it. I had an experience when I was in vet school. I really wanted to do this sea turtle rescue. I thought it just sounded awesome. And somebody said to me, oh gosh, that program, that wasn't a good program. I really didn't like it. And I was like, oh gosh, I was really kind of put off by it at night. So I didn't go for it. You didn't have to do anything. All you had to do was like put your name out there. And then a couple of years later, I heard like everybody who did it just raved about it. And I was like, oh, why did I listen to that person? Why didn't I just go try it for myself? You know? So sometimes just being in the right place in the right time and being open to things that are around you are most important. And then finally, well, maybe not finally, but from training programs to employment, I want you to appreciate that there are jobs out there after all of this training. So like I said, that one student who said, well, if I could get a job, I would do this. There are jobs out there. And in fact, there's more and more jobs now than there was 10 or 20 years ago, which is great. So, for example, let's see, we've got 3, I looked on the listserv, the ZooVet and the WDA listserv, probably like a week or 2 ago. And there were over 20 positions that were advertised that in some form, shape, or manner had to do with zoo and or wildlife medicine. And so I listed 3 examples here specifically. The first one was an assistant professor with a One Health approach to infectious diseases at the university at UConn. So this person didn't have to be a veterinarian. They're just looking for someone who knew about One Health. So that's a really cool job as a non-veterinarian. But if you're a vet and you know about One Health and you have a background in that, even better. They were looking for an associate veterinarian at Takagama Chimpanzee Sanctuary, which is in Sierra Leone. So pretty amazing opportunity to work with lots of chimps, wildlife rehabilitation, and to work in another country. And then the third one is they're looking for a staff vet at Columbus Zoo. So, you know, right in your backyard, there can be opportunities that pop up. So, those are just 3 examples. There were a lot of other cool stuff in there. So I want to then quickly talk about my personal experiences. So I followed this traditional route that I mentioned, that I described. I did multiple student externships, mostly in wildlife rehab, because I wanted to work with free ranging wildlife, not in a zoo setting. But I decided that I should probably try a zoo. I shouldn't, you know, I shouldn't give that opportunity up. So I did an externship at the Milwaukee County Zoo, and I absolutely loved it. I did not think that I would enjoy it at all, but I loved it. Great people, great animal collection, just a really enjoyable place to be. And so that really opened up my eyes a little bit more to zoos. Afterwards, though, I really wanted a break. And I actually went to veterinary school at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. And I absolutely loved it over there. And I was like, you know what? I don't really want to go home yet. I want to hang out here, have a good time. And I really want to solidify my clinical skills. And at that time, doing 2 internships was not the norm. Really only doing 1 internship was kind of the norm. So I did 2.5 years of just clinical experience, and I worked a lot with exotic pets because everybody else was completely terrified of them. So all the vets would be like, here, you take the rabbits, hamsters, guinea pigs, and all of that. I got really good at that, which was great, you know, build my confidence in that, really solidified all the didactic learning that I had from vet school. And I was then lucky enough to get an internship This was an internship at the Tulsa Zoo and Oklahoma State University. So remember when I said you had to travel, they hired 2 interns at the same time. And one intern would do a rotation at the Tulsa Zoo and one would do it at Oklahoma State University. They are 90 miles apart. And every 6 weeks, you would move into the other person's house. So my intern mate was married. And I was like, so how's this gonna work? She's like, well, I don't mind you living with my husband if you don't mind. And I was like, wait, give it a go. So it was a little awkward at first, but he was a nice guy, you know, and I was working 12-hour days and coming home basically just going to sleep. So it really didn't matter. But every 6 weeks, I had to move my stuff and then go back to another place. So having pets, that was not very convenient. And you know, it was a lot of travel and it was tiresome. So a year of that, and then I went on and did a residency at the Wildlife Center of Virginia. And that was in association with the University of Tennessee. So predominantly I was based at the Wildlife Center. And this was me doing exam on a juvenile bald eagle at the time. This was a wildlife hospital in a rural area of Virginia, where we did everything from baby squirrels and opossums to bald eagles to great horned owls, snakes, and black bear. We did a lot of black bear work as well. So that was an ACZM approved program, and I did get the opportunity to do research, and I did get the opportunity to travel to Africa and help out with a program that was there. So I really feel like I got a lot of great experience from that. I really enjoyed my residency, and yeah, I wouldn't change it. So after that, I did get a job, but I had to wait 6 months till I got the job I wanted. So I worked in emergency medicine and I got a job at Pittsburgh Zoo, which really wasn't my plan. I wanted to work in wildlife. I wanted to do free ranging wildlife. And I was like, I'm going to go get the mountain gorilla veterinary job, you know, in Rwanda. I'm like, I'm perfect for that. And I didn't get it. And so I said, could you give me some feedback and tell me why I didn't get that? And they're like, well, you've never worked with gorillas. Oh, okay. I guess I should have thought about that. So what did I do? Get a job that had gorilla, or get a job that is a zoo that had gorillas, orangutans, colobus monkeys, a whole bunch of them. And by that time, I was like, oh, you know, this is great, working with a lot more diverse species. And so instead, the next job I did was a wildlife field veterinarian for the Wildlife Conservation Society in Cambodia. And I lived in Cambodia for 2.5 years doing field work. That was awesome. I wanted to come back to the States. So I found basically I hadn't done clinical medicine for 3 years. So I was like, you know, need to refresh my clinical skills. So I did exotic pet medicine and small animal medicine for about a year. And then I got recruited for a job at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, which is very similar to the Wilds, actually. Really cool place, loved working there. And then worked at a couple other sort of large acre facilities, kind of like the Wilds, at the Audubon Species Survival Center in New Orleans. And then came to be the director of the conservation medicine department at the Wilds. And I should ask at the beginning, how many people here have been to the Wilds? Just curious. So you gotta go. Yeah, I know, it's great. I just wanted to go over quickly, got a few minutes to cover a couple of the things that I did or do now. And I wanted to cover one about when I worked for WCS, because a lot of people are like, what did you do? And so one of the things we did was we were looking for avian influenza at the time. That was when bird flu started coming out, and we really wanted to learn more about avian influenza. So we were trapping wild birds, identifying them, collecting swabs, and then I took them to Hong Kong, and then we took them to the Pasteur Institute laboratory, and then the researchers there started doing analysis for avian influenza. And this branched out into looking at diseases in other high-risk taxonomic groups. So basically, we were looking for the next pandemic. So we were collecting samples from bats, because bats have very diverse sort of viruses. We actually found a coronavirus in bats. We discovered a novel coronavirus in birds. We were looking at primates, and we're also looking at rodents. Those are taxonomic groups that can carry a lot of diseases that can then cross over into people. So not your typical clinical veterinary medicine. And then the other thing we do is we would monitor the wildlife trade. So if you are not aware, many of you probably are, but if you're not aware, legal and illegal wildlife trade is one of the top threats to wildlife globally. And it is one of the largest trafficking, I would say, globally. So behind trafficking guns, trafficking drugs, trafficking people, and trafficking wildlife. Those are the top four. So if you can traffic guns, you can traffic wildlife. And so what you're seeing in this picture on your left is an Eld's deer leg, mixed in with, I don't know what's in those jars. And then some like little, they're like nuts, nut seeds, that this person is selling in a market. It's like a little sort of like colander basket that it's all there. They sell everything from birds, bats, rodents for you to eat, turtles, and anything else that you can think of. Primates stretched out on a stick, snakes, snake like this on a stick, pretty much any wild animal you can think of other than vultures, they would eat. Because vultures eat carrion and that's just gross. So they didn't eat that, but bats were considered an aphrodisiac. Some of these, like the Eld's deer leg, I don't really know what that did, but a lot of it has to do with like local traditional medicine and their and spiritual beliefs. Some of it actually has some truth to it. Bear bile actually does help if you have liver disease. They've been using it in Chinese medicine for many centuries, thousands of years actually, and it actually works. Some of them though may or may not have the properties. I mean, some they might claim cures cancer. I don't think that it does, but some of them actually do have very powerful medicine. So that's kind of what I did in Cambodia, just a look at that. I want to talk about what some of the cases that I work with at the wilds. If you know anything about the wilds, you know that we have a lot of rhinos. This is Bernard. Or Bernie. He is a southern white rhino. He's an adult male. He's about 32 years old. They can live certainly to be in their 40s or even 50. And Bernard came to us not long ago. And he came off lame on his left front. And really, rhinos don't go lame. What they really do is they just kind of offload their weight. And you can kind of see that leg is cocked a little bit, which you wouldn't think much of it, but that's really all they do to show that they're uncomfortable or maybe a little bit of rocking. And we're like, oh, we were concerned. So we started him on an oral anti-inflammatory, and we had a look at the foot and we knew that he had some abnormal conformation. So just like a horse hoof wall can be abnormal, their nails can grow abnormal. His was abnormal, and he was actually a very good boy. He'd been trained before, but he did allow us after only a couple weeks to take a radiograph of the foot. And the reason why we knew to focus on that foot was because an abscess had ruptured through the nail. And I'm cursing myself now because I put my arrow on the wrong toe. So the toe that is actually a problem is the one that is in not the one where the arrow's on, but the one completely on the other side, the other small toe. What you can see there is actually not very easy to see. There's little white striations. I don't know if this mouse will, yeah. So these little white striations are actually some just debris and impact and cracks in the hoof. There are a couple here, but they're a little smaller and wispy. But there's a lot more here and they're longer and extending farther into that nail. And there's potentially some soft tissue swelling in this, but this is only one image and we can't say for sure, but the radiologist says that's a likely thing. So, but the good news is the bone looks good. And that's really why we did the x-ray. So staff did a great job. They actually trained him to place his foot on an x-ray plate, which was extremely expensive. And we were all really concerned, but he did a great job. The techs got an image really quickly, and they were able to kind of pull that thing out from underneath his foot, and he did wonderful. And this is all on his own doing. He can walk away if he wants, but he wants to stay there because we give him food and we pet him. He loves being petted. So he's doing much better now. We gave him phenylbutazone, and that took the pain away. We cleaned the abscess once it ruptured every day with dilute betadine and flushed it out. It's now pretty clean and it should be healing. So That's great. It's not a difficult case as it sounds, but getting Bernard to do what you want him to do, he doesn't have to always comply. And so those are a lot of the things that we have to think about when we're treating wildlife. Another case that I honestly never thought I'd be working on is insects. In general, they're not my favorite, but I do really like these guys. This is the American burying beetle. The American burying beetle is the largest carrion beetle in North America. So they have a very important role. If there's a dead animal, they help ingest that or digest that, which is really important. They are federally threatened, and in Ohio, they're endangered. And at the wilds, we breed these animals and then we release them back out onto our property in hopes that the population will grow. And so they're very limited in Ohio. And what happened was there was a change in the husbandry, a change in how they were caring for this animal. It was very minor, but they did change something. And the staff started to see, you can see by this arrow, this sort of irregular pitting right here, which isn't normal. As soon as this thing goes away, you can see on the other picture, it doesn't look like that. And this is on the underside. There really isn't much change here. This looks pretty good for the most part, but you definitely have a problem there. And so what happened was we staff noticed this change. So we did an exam on him, on several of them actually, and we found that this was a fungus. So we took a swab, we sent it off for genetics, and they identified a fungus. And we were really concerned, and we were like, what do we do? I've never treated a beetle before. I don't know what to do. So I had to go back into the literature and start reviewing and researching. And I found one article where they treated some other insect species with this product clotrimazole, and they mixed it with DMSO. So you had to get this compounded. So this was a vet in the UK. So I emailed this guy. I'm like, hey, how did you make this? Because we've got an endangered beetle. It's got a fungal infection. I don't know what else to use, but if it didn't kill your beetles, maybe it'll be good for our beetles. And he's like, I don't really know. I just called the pharmacist and they just gave it to me. He's like, good luck. So I was like, shoot, okay. So we found a pharmacy that would work with us. They compounded this for us, and the staff, we had 300 beetles at the time, literally had to take a tiny little paintbrush, take each beetle out because they all had different levels of fungus on them, paint them with this compound once a day for 7 days, and it got better. And so after that, but it didn't go away. So we kind of extended it, did another like I think about 5 days or something like that. And eventually it resolved. So now what you can see on the second picture, the March 14th picture, as soon as that goes away, is the it looks more normal and more uniform, and there isn't that kind of the gray mucky stuff. And so that was really a neat thing. That was new to me, and something I never really thought I would do, but really neat. And so that's sometimes how in Zoom medicine you get to these weird and wacky things, and their information, I guess the point of that is the information isn't always out there, and you sometimes just have to move forward without knowing everything all at one time. And that is a big part of what we do in Zoom medicine. Extrapolate from other research or other animals, and then try to apply it to your situation. So that was just a couple examples of some interesting cases that we deal with, from the very, very large to the very, very small. I did want to show this slide though of online references. I think that these are all going to give you information that I presented here and a whole lot more information. If you're interested in zoo veterinary medicine or wildlife medicine, these references are a great place to start. Particularly AAZB and WDA. Those are the two biggest ones. So I would recommend having a look at those. And then I just wanted to say thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to, If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
And then Dr. Joyner said she can also stay after. So if you guys want to stay after to ask questions, you can do that as well. Please make sure that you sign in if you haven't already. It's up in the corner up here. And thank you guys so much for coming. There are no other questions.
Running the vortex. Yeah. I think it's the exercise.